Shabbat Shalom. I spent time this week with all of our nursery school students. We have about 125 of them. I spent FaceTime with every single one of them. We try and give me FaceTime with all of the kids before the main holidays of the year. And as you know, well, let me ask you what I asked them. What holiday are we celebrating next week? You got the right answer. And so did many of the kids. A number of kids yelled out, Shabbat! We're celebrating Shabbat next week. Which, when you think about it, is also the right answer. You know, by now our preschool kids know me, and they know the answers that I expect, because every Tat Shabbat service, I ask them, what day is it today? And they say, Shabbat, Shabbat, it's Shabbat. Their Pavlovian response is Shabbat. You know, they see me on the street with their mother, they call me the Shabbat man. There's the Shabbat man. In one of the classes, the child was so pleased with himself when he yelled out, Purim, we're celebrating Purim next week. I guess he was still on a high from all of the fun from last month. He was expressing a subtle plea to have Purim come again. Alas, if only life was like that. How soon the reality of life descends on children too. I suggested, I struggled to figure out how to affirm this child as well. But it's not Purim next week. So I said, really close answer, because they both start with the letter P. And it was only a month ago. And when I asked in one class, and what do we eat on Passover? One child responded, challah, we eat challah on Passover. And when you think about it, actually, there's nothing to think about. That's the wrong answer. So I was stumped and I just ignored the kid. But for me, especially at this young age, the answers to the question are not as important as the questions themselves. Young children forget most of the answers anyway, until you repeat it to them over and over and over and over again. It is the eating of the matzah that will create the knowledge in these kids that we eat matzah on Passover, not some rabbi giving them a lecture on what Passover foods we have. The right answers will come sooner or later if we keep learning in life, but asking the right questions, that's an art. And a skill that is at the very core of learning, is at the very heart of Jewish pedagogy, and is among the central features of the holiday next week, Pesach. The great Jewish physicist and Nobel laureate Isidore Rabi was once asked, why did you become a scientist? And he responded, my mother made me a scientist without even intending. Because instead of asking me, what did you learn in school today? She always asked me, did you ask a good question today? Passover especially is the festival of asking good questions. Why do we eat this matzah? Why do we eat this shank bone? Why do we eat these bitter herbs? And Passover especially is when the children ask the questions. For many people, the highlight of the Seder is when the children, or the youngest child on behalf of all the children, asks the four questions. Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol halelot? How is this night different from all other nights? And so we learn two central lessons from the Seder. First, through the very words of the Haggadah and the unfolding of the Seder itself, we learn that asking questions is a key to understanding the concept of freedom, which is at the core of Passover. And there's magnificent subtlety in this. By its very nature, the asking of questions is itself a form of freedom. Tyrannies do not tolerate questions. They suppress questions. Unquestioning obedience is what Pharaoh demands, not free inquiry. Throughout history, where questions were suppressed and where dissent was discouraged, you could guarantee that that society was not free. With all of his bombast and with all of his power, there is a great fear in the heart of Pharaoh. It's why, from Egypt until our very days, strong men are always surrounded by military forces, bodyguards, bayonets, tanks, military parades. They project hard force. But terror is in their hearts. They are afraid of being challenged. They're afraid of questions. Do you see the videos this week of the mouse that scurried along there on the subway car? Did you see how it caused a mass freakout? There were adults and children who didn't have their feet on the ground. They stood on the subway car chairs. So it is with Pharaoh. He fears the little mouse of independent thought. Despite his vast military retinue, one small mouse of critical examination throws him into a panic. He tries his best to extinguish this spark of ideas, of intellectual challenge. But sooner or later, all pharaohs discover the same thing. All the swords and all the guns and all the planes in the world cannot extinguish the spark of freedom that lies in the very heart of human beings. And when we teach our children from the very moment that they begin to learn to hear questions and to ask questions, by implication, we are teaching them that free people learn by asking questions, and that free societies improve by those who insist on questioning dogmas, assumptions, and practices. And that these questions are not only legitimate, but that we cannot do without them. We cannot long survive free and prosperous without critical challenge and examination. But the second lesson of Passover is this. At some point in our mature lives, we must also have answers, even to the hardest questions. It's not only about asking the questions. Now, the philosopher groaned out his questions: what is the nature of the world? Why do I exist? What is the purpose of existence? And his wife, hearing him speak these questions, she was pleased that he was in full philosophical mode. What's for lunch? She heard him groan. What's for lunch? What kind of question is that for a philosopher? Well, he said, I want some of my questions to have answers. The Haggadah does give answers. We eat the matzah because we were driven out of Egypt without enough time to prepare food. We eat the bitter herbs to remind us how the Egyptians embittered our lives. The 4 questions, which is really only one question, how is this night different from all other nights, does have 4 answers. The 4 children, 3 of whom ask questions, all receive answers. These answers are not necessarily comprehensive or exclusive. There are multiple approaches and differing responses as the generations unfold. This is to our credit. We're constantly adding questions, and we're constantly adding more sophisticated answers. We may not have a perfect answer. Sometimes answers take a lifetime to discover, or generations, or centuries, or millennia, whether in science, philosophy, or religion. Nonetheless, we do need to confront these questions and formulate some responses, even if they are theories and not fact. And the Haggadah takes care to provide a response to each question that is asked, even if later generations change those responses. And that's the key message for adults. We need to know enough Judaism to be able to respond to our children's Jewish questions. We need to be committed enough to Judaism so that they will ask the questions in the first place. The Jewish way is children asking questions of their parents and other adults, and their parents and other adults responding. It's a constant cycle of asking and responding. Judaism doesn't work if the cycle is halted. Judaism doesn't work if the children don't ask. Judaism doesn't work if the parents don't answer. Nowhere in Jewish tradition, not in the Bible, not in the Haggadah, not anywhere do we confront a situation where children ask and the parents don't know enough to answer. We have an example in the Haggadah of a child not knowing enough to ask, which, by implication, is the sage's subtle way of criticizing the parents, but not of a parent not knowing enough to answer to give some kind of Jewish response. That's unprecedented in all of Jewish history. Remember, children won't even ask in the first place if they are not put in Jewish situations by their parents that stimulate their Jewish attention and interest. The secret of Jewish survival is in the cycle of transmission. Every generation of Jews taught Judaism to their posterity. Every generation of parents reminded their children of events long ago. Every generation of children was stimulated to ask questions about Judaism. Every generation of parents knew how to answer them in some way that made Jewish sense. Every generation of Jews took the oath to teach and to explain Judaism to their children. Every generation of Jews considered itself as if it was personally redeemed from Egypt. Living inside of us is not only our generation, but when we tell the story of Passover, we invoke the whole history of our people from Egypt until now. I wish all of you a Chag Sameach, a joyous and festive Passover. May you be blessed to ask many good questions, and may you also discover some really good Jewish responses. Amen.